Hello and welcome to Backstage with Gig Performer. My name is Brett Pontecorvo, and we are here every Thursday, 11:30 a.m., sharing how people are using Gig Performer, some great tips, tricks, best practices, all of that great stuff. If you are here, please let us know you're here. Say hello in the comments. We'd love to connect with you. I already see we've got Omri Cohen. Thank you so much for being here. Jeff Wheeler, regular attender. Thank you so much for being here. We've got Device Meister. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate you. We have an awesome episode today. If you were here last week, then you will know Kevin Fraser, whose name I pronounced incorrectly probably a dozen times last week, is here today to talk about generative ambient music. That's the word that I used. I'm not even sure that that's what he calls it, but I can tell you this. He has created a situation for himself where in a relatively short period of time, he has mastered his use case. We'll see what he says if he feels he's mastered it, but he developed a particular practice regiment, I'm going to dare to call it, that allowed him to go from being a brand new Gig Performer user, starting at square zero, to creating some really interesting soundscapes. Now, if you haven't heard of Kevin's work before, then I want you to check out that link in the description right now, because we have his YouTube channel in there. And there are quite a few live streamed pieces on there, so you can kind of get some context. But I do know after we chat with him today, you will certainly get it. You'll get it. It's very, very cool. So if you are here right now, since today is all about generative music, can you let us know in the comments, what is your favorite sequencer? Is your favorite sequencer a hardware sequencer? Is it a software sequencer? Do you use them at all? I know for me, when I saw Kevin's setup, I was like, wow, I don't use any sequencing. Everything I do is totally triggered by some sort of a MIDI keyboard controller. But Kevin's setup, everything is triggered by some sort of a sequencer. And I actually think there's some powerful possibility in allowing yourself to create situations where sequencers can really generate something fantastic for you. Now, we're about to jump into Kevin being on stage. However, co-founder David Jameson is playing a show tonight, and he's shared with us a link if you want to check it out. There is a live stream that you can watch from anywhere in the world at the link in the description below. Now, there is a $5 viewing fee. But David mentioned specifically that he has no control over that. But if you want to see how he's using Gig Performer in this band, this is his Steely Dan tribute band. Then you'll want to click that link, grab a ticket, check out what he's doing. One of the reasons that Gig Performer works so well is that David is using Gig Performer. And so things that come up or things that work not so well, he knows about because it has to work for him, because he happens to also be a professional musician in addition to being a ridiculously talented software developer. So make sure you check out that show. Don't jump away just yet, but do make sure at the end of this stream, you check out Kevin's YouTube channel where he's creating all of this generative music. And I'm sure he'll be willing to connect with you as well if you have any questions for him. So don't forget, let us know what you are using as a sequencer. OJ Lab, watching live from Ghana, thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Adam. So happy that you are here as well. All right. Without further ado, we are going to welcome Kevin Fraser onto Backstage with Gig Performer. Kevin, how's it going?
Hi. Let me just. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that clearly before we proceed. Brett, first of all, I would like to thank you so much, and David, for inviting me to share, what I've done here. It's kind of humbling, and I will share with you that the past week has been. I mean, I didn't tell you about this in the pre-show, but the past week has been this insane meltdown of unbelievable proportions for me. My computer completely. After we talked, I told you about my 1,500 successful Geek Squad calls. My computer completely melted down. I'm talking about I couldn't install Windows on it. It wouldn't install Windows.
Did you call the Geek Squad?
I did not, because they would have called me. But the good news is, I completely repaired absolutely everything. I'm talking bare metal.
Wow.
All of my VSTs re-authenticated. Nothing is lost. Everything came back 100%. It was about a 2.5 terabyte backup. So all
Kevin,
the stuff that I've done, I think I'm going to put that into a PDF because other people might want to know about it. Sorry,
yeah.
go on.
Well, no, there's some hidden wisdom here. I know we're in and we're like coming on strong, but you must have a great system of backing your stuff up.
I do. Yeah. There's a bunch of things. There's actually really only two things that I use.
Okay. Tell
First of all, from personal, I mean, I'm not paid by them or anything, but I recommend Backblaze. It saved me.
Okay. Great. And that's the primary way you back your stuff up. That's
no, I also use on Windows, I use something called Macrium Reflect.
Okay.
Which I cannot recommend highly enough either, because now I know how well it works.
In any case, if you are watching right now and you are not backing up your computer,
don't do it.
Today's your day. You thought we were going to
later. Back your computer up now. Like, don't.
Yes. Yeah. So Kevin, you've had an expansive career. You've been all over the map, right? Like, who
kind of sort of
who are you, Kevin? Can you give us a brief introduction to your life? How did you end up here?
You may get a sense of this somehow, but I have a background in performing, Brad.
Yeah, you know what?
Believe it or not, when I was a kid, I mean, I'm talking about when I was a teenager, like a young teenager, I did community theater productions of retired Broadway musicals. Believe it or not, I played Tevye when I was 16, if you can believe that. I on the one hand, wow. I played and then on the other hand, nice Catholic boy from Winnipeg playing this in the middle of a pogrom. I did all kinds of Broadway musicals. I did plays. I played Matt and the Fantastics. I went to acting school. I did all that kind of stuff. And then I got into broadcasting. Mm-hmm. In radio, back when radio was still a thing. I was on the air in a couple of major markets in the big chair, as we say. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that I needed to feed my wife and stuff like that. So I went into
Was she particularly hungry, or was it just
radio? It's not as glamorous as it looks. That's the thing.
Gotcha.
It's not as glamorous as it looks. And so I went into technical writing, and I worked for I worked in telephony, I worked in defense, I worked in test and measurement. I worked for a little outfit called Navtel for years. The technicians are going to know that name forever. Mm-hmm. I wrote the first manual for a recording hardware string search triggering protocol analyzer. And I went on from there to a bunch of other adventures, including surviving a dot-com meltdown and spending a year in film school back in the 90s. So I have been around the block, as we say.
Yeah. And you're also an expert troubleshooter. I feel like that's relevant.
You always wonder about that. I've been a software developer too, right? So you always wonder about that, and you always think, can I do this? Well, it turns out that I can, and I just proved it myself this week. I also, I didn't even tell you about this yet, but I also evaded a particular health scare this week. So I had quite a week, I got to tell you.
Great.
But when I got there's this virus that it's been on the papers. You heard about it?
There's been a virus?
It's this virus. Everybody's talking about it.
Okay.
I got it for the third time back in April.
Did McAfee protect you from that, or was it?
I realized that I needed, and probably other people needed, some kind of expression of healing of some sort, like just in a sensory way, healing. And so I had gotten this program, Gig Performer. Mm-hmm. I got it at the Black Friday sale because I'm so cheap I squeak when I walk. And I got this program set up, and I kind of played with it a little bit, and I tried a couple things out, and I got my controller working with it. I have an Akai MPK Mini Mark II, like, a lot of, probably millions of people have those things. Mm-hmm. And I started messing around with it a little bit. I'm not a keyboardist. I've done music kind of, sort of, all these years, but I have this kind of mental block, for instance, about music theory. And I'm sure you're a teacher, aren't you, Brett? You're a piano teacher.
I
So
am.
you have lots of students. And so I'm kind of this idiot savant sort of guy with music theory.
Yeah, sure.
I know just enough to be dangerous, you know? And so I started playing around, or to think I'm dangerous, at least. I started playing around with different tonalities, and I came up with this hack called minor pentatonic.
Yeah. It's a great hack.
And so minor pentatonic plus transposing gives you a lot of options that you didn't know were there before. So I started playing around with that, you know, throw in the odd white key for spice. You know, I started playing around with that. And I decided that I wanted to learn the software. I not only wanted to learn the VSTs, the kind of ragtag collection of VSTs that I have, that a lot of us have, right? If you play around with this sort of stuff. But I also wanted to learn how to put it together. And I had a couple of years ago built this really pretty complex setup using Reaper, which, you know, I will say can function as a really capable VST if you want to use it that way. But
like
you
a VST host, you mean?
Feeling about it because it's a DAW, right? And so you want to use a VST host. And that's why I got Gig Performer. So I decided, okay, how do you do this? How do I simplify it? How do I break it down to the simplest? Because I tend to elaborate.
Sure.
I'm just warning you. I tend to elaborate. And how do I make this as simple as possible for me? And this is what came out. I went, okay, what's the simplest thing I can do? And I just opened a blank Gig Performer document. And I thought, okay, I'm going to treat this like weightlifting or something, right? I'm just going to try a little more every day. And before I knew it, I was doing like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Like, I think I even did 4 or 5 of them a week at one point for a period of time. And after I sort of stayed with this, I wound up with like there's actually well over 50 hours. And I live streamed all of it. I didn't make it and render it and upload it. I actually live streamed all of it because I've got the gear here. Because I also, in the middle of all that stuff I told you about before, I live streamed on Twitch for 5 years. That's a whole other story.
Right. Video game live streaming, right? Is that?
Yes. That's a long story.
Yeah.
And I had never even looked at video games before I started doing that. Like, you know, I said it's a very strange story, maybe another time.
Yeah,
but
sure.
But the point is that I started building these, I call them generative ambient soundscapes, because I don't really think they're music. Like, I've done compositions and I studied film scoring in the film school. As this kind of, you know, hidden musical illiterate, you know, I didn't really know what I was talking about quite. But I found that I could come up with something that I was satisfied with, that I was pleased with. And I also looked at the enormous market. If you search on YouTube for relaxation music, which probably a lot of us and anybody watching this stream has done, you find that there's thousands and thousands of videos. Some of them have gotten billions of views over a long period of time. Like, some of them have been there for like 13 years or something. And you know, you always want to kind of figure out a way to kind of tap into that whole idea of, excuse me, monetizing your content and so forth. So this is what I focused on. And I started doing these long, 12-hour long videos. Actually, 11 minutes and hours and 55 minutes is the most that YouTube will let you get away with. But I noticed that all of those other videos, they were just shuffling a playlist. They had a set of pieces that they'd produced, and they basically fed that out through a playlist, and they were looping. And YouTube actually has regulations now. They've actually added regulations, Brett, about in their terms of service, that they refer to as looping and it'll come to me. I'm pulling a senior moment here now that I'm in my 60s, but looping content where they want to, because there's an epidemic of this. People of taking, I just saw one yesterday morning. This video was kind of a joke. The guy was saying, all you have to do is generate a hunk of white noise in Audacity and multiply that out with Handbrake for 12 hours and upload it to YouTube. And I'm like, there's videos that have zillions of views that have nothing but that. I wanted to come up with it had some kind of musical intelligence behind it, or something that could pass for musical intelligence, you know. So that's what I did.
Yeah. So all of this is so fascinating. So first of all, just to bring some context to what you're saying here, you had 2 goals, right? One was to learn the software, and 2 was to do it in a contextual way where you were building for something instead of just learning for the sake of learning. And this is key. And friends, those of you who have been watching every week, amongst gig performer power users, the number one thing that unites them all is context. It's the number one thing. Everybody who's using gig performer really well on a high level, doing interesting things, is building for something, for your YouTube channel, making generative music, for a gig, for whatever it is. So what's unique about your situation, Kevin, is that you created a project for yourself. You created context for yourself. So for anyone who's watching, you can create context for yourself right now. In this very moment, you can create context, and it will, in my opinion, exponentially increase the rate at which you are learning, because you'll have a purpose behind it.
And Brett, let me add something along that line. My youngest son is a multi-international award-winning jazz guitarist.
Yes.
And he's a teacher like you. He's a professional musician.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see with him and his friends, and I'm sure David can attest to this, is that when you're a professional musician, and this is what gig performer was designed for, was you professional working gigging musicians. We're going out to a paying audience like David's doing tonight.
Yep.
And you can't have anything go wrong at all, right? You got to
Mhm.
play it safe, and you got to make sure that everything goes to plan as rehearsed.
Mhm.
Especially if you are a professional, and if you're trying to figure out how to use gig performer, give yourself permission to be an amateur.
Yeah.
Really I decided I'm going to be an amateur, therefore I can get away with murder. And that's what I did.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's like the freedom to fail. Yeah, 100 couldn't agree with you more, Kevin. So you created these pieces, and it's not, I feel we left this part out, but it wasn't just the music you created. You also kind of created some visualizations to go with the music that you made.
Eventually. That's another part of it. Yeah. I tried to simplify it as much as possible. The only thing I worried about, you see, if you look at my earliest ones, and a lot of them, like for a couple of months, I paid no attention at all to the visuals. I took a picture from NASA of the first image that came back from that new observatory platform they put up, of two colliding galaxies. And I put that up, and I just used that. I put up this text. I think I said, "Welcome to the planetarium." And a funny thing happened. When I was doing that, I eventually got a message from YouTube telling me that my videos didn't have enough motion in them.
Ah, right.
If you can believe that. They know everything about what you're uploading to YouTube. I got this video saying, your videos don't have enough movement in them. So I said, okay, you want movement? I'll give you movement. That's what I did.
Which thankfully you have some experience in creating those types of things. Because when I saw your Queen video, which I guess we'll talk about that project in a second here, and looked at what was going on there, I was like, well, I don't know how to do that.
You watch that? Okay, thanks.
Yeah. It's like another, it's another skill altogether. It's kind of just in the realm of creating. It's like a thing that that you acquired somewhere.
I'm about to shift gears too, in a way, like it's almost like this 6-month run that I did sort of prepared me for the next step. It's almost like I'm graduating and going on to the next step, right? And so when I did my video tribute for Her Late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, I do live in a Commonwealth country, so technically I do, when the day that happened, I had to say, the Queen is dead, long live the King. That's what we do here, right?
Interesting.
Constitutional monarchy and all that. But I decided I wanted to do a tribute to this individual who, she's been the Queen for all of us, all of our lives, and 99% of the time. And I came up with some copy. And I went to make the music, and I guess there was some element of inspiration there that I feel like I sort of distilled everything down.
Yeah.
And because I tried a lot of different approaches in using gig performer for all sorts of different techniques. And I really went down some rabbit holes. That's another thing about giving yourself permission to be an amateur and sort of be like unaccountable in a way. Like I chased things down rabbit holes, Brett. Like I went wacky with the Midi controls and all kinds of things in a couple of places. And there were a number of them that actually exploded, and I decided not to use them. I uploaded them, and then I watched them, and I didn't like how they sounded, or I didn't like something else about it, or something technical went wrong. So there were actually more than 50 some of them that I did. But the point I was trying to make about the video about Her Late Majesty was that made much more use of the broadcast style setup that I've got here.
Yeah. So for those of you
and
who
as I
can't
said, I'm
tell,
shifting gears. I'm going to start integrating now, because I've got a lot more potentials. I got one of these guys too.
yeah, is that the
and
Stream Deck?
yeah, and I'm going to start. And I also, I've got. I've already done experiments with this and got the technical end of it working. I'm sending OSC messages that are timed from the Windows Task Manager. It's like cron if you're on a Mac or something like that. So I have like another semester coming where I'm going to be ratcheting it up a bit more.
Awesome. So let's pivot and have a look at what you're doing. Does now feel like an okay time to kind of explain your process?
Sure.
And by the way, when you explain this process, I want everybody who is watching to remember that, Kevin, you started from scratch every day.
Every day I open a blank gig file with nothing in it at all. Zippity doo dah.
Which in some ways is the least efficient, and in some ways
it is absolutely the least efficient. And I did it that way on purpose because it was the least efficient.
Yes.
I wanted to, like I said, like treating it like weightlifting. I wanted to internalize that process somehow.
Do you feel that you've internalized it, Kevin?
Say again?
Do you feel that you've internalized it?
Yeah, I did. I was going to say when I made this one, I made this project just for this stream, by the way, the one you're looking at now.
That. Thank you. Yes.
A bunch of things kind of came together and distilled, and I realized that I may have a problem now. I may have a syndrome. I may have a blank gig file syndrome, where I can't use Gig Performer unless I open it with a blank file. Because I tried going back and looking at some of my own projects, and it was like, oh man.
Yeah, remembering what you did is the challenge, right?
So long ago, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a new problem to deal with. But
yeah, it's like you have to leave yourself breadcrumbs, which like you don't use the front panels at all, I assume, right?
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Oh, you do. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, that's part of the whole thing that I went down. In fact, in this case, let me just get a little more into this one. In this case, I'm actually using this is the global, okay?
Global rack space.
Yeah, for the global rack space, as you can see now, in the panels. What I've done here is, I went through a phase where I used the panels to control like levels of synths and things like that for achieving a mix. But then I realized that with Gig Performer, you can control literally anything. I mean, if there's a way to control it in a synth, then you can map it out to a controller, a keyboard controller, or you can get that data that's just data. It's just MIDI data coming from somewhere. It can be coming from a MIDI file, like I told you last week. I even tried making MIDI files that contain nothing but LFO expressions of CC changes and stuff like that, because in this type of music you want to get these long scale changes happening. So the theory here now is that I want to create like an instrument, a total instrument, because I'm working in the box. And instead of worrying about this hardware device and that hardware device and so forth, I mean, I do have one controller, but it's just one of those little $99 Akai controllers.
Yeah.
What I want to do is come up with a much more meaningful, powerful kind of control.
Yeah.
So for instance, these two, okay, so let me just run this one. So this has got a contact stack that I built yesterday, and I can go into how I put that one together and how I control it. But if I want to add a little bit of excitement to it now, this is a case of adding one of the these little controls. So this one here is just a level. Can't reach it. And I've scaled it there. David will be able to recognize that, so that I'm not going to be likely to overdrive. Even if I crank it all the way up, there's a little bit of headroom left over there, so that I'm not going to break anything down necessarily. But these other two, what's happening with them is something completely different. I've mapped these to CC14 and CC15 in this case. And I think you're going to like this one, Brett, because this is actually kind of a utility thing. So
Okay.
instead of just controlling levels, I'm controlling something quite meaningful in the overall rig. So let me go in there now and show you.
Kevin, you've suddenly become very blurry. Do you have any thoughts about how that may have happened? If not, we'll just push onward if it's like the internet connection or something.
It looks the same coming back to me from StreamYard. It looks okay to me.
Okay. We can push forward. I'm like gig performer is it almost looks like is underwater.
Weird.
So I don't
I
know.
didn't change anything. Now the a pretty powerful machine here, but and this isn't a very demanding project, but I didn't.
We can work
switch
with what we
anything
got
on
if
or off.
everything is the same. If you were like, oh, it could be this thing, we may as well have tweaked it. But if you're not sure, we'll just
Well,
keep
you know
pushing.
what? Let me see if I can do something to actually adjust that. I could spend a lot of time on this, but
Yeah, sure.
okay. So what I've done here, and I don't know if this is the best way or the worst way. I mean, this goes back to the whole thing of oh, that's the wrong side. This goes back to the whole thing of trying to get the right way of doing this. Here's Contact. I'm using Contact 7, just released last week, yay.
Yep.
And what I've done here is now you probably know very well how Contact works.
Yep.
And if I can just take a moment here, Omri
Sure.
Cohen showed up to watch this stream at the beginning. Do you know who he is?
No.
Omri is a YouTuber who specializes in Eurorack.
Okay, great.
And he has to actually, he's done hardware, but he also does in the box using VCV rack. And he has done, I don't know, hundreds of videos probably by now, which I've taken a lot of inspiration from his work because he's very detailed and he explains all the principles of what he's doing. Check him out, Omri Cohen. And also Jens from Device Meister makes one of the sequencers that I use here. And he has very kindly watched today as well. I tried to tell some people, some of the VST developers, that this was going on.
Well, thank you to those people for coming and checking it out. We'll make sure to link those people up as well in the description. So you said Omri Cohen and Device Meister, right?
Even better, Jens from Device Meister. Okay, so what I've done here, and that was not rehearsed, by the way.
Fantastic.
What I've done here is I've mapped in. Okay, now a lot of people aren't aware of how this little sequencer works in Contact Play instruments. I'm sure you are, Brett, but these knobs, of course, can all be automated, as you can tell. And so what I do here, and this is kind of a utility thing, I'm using another sequencer. I have to go into the gazintas and the gazoutas here, called Stokas. And Stokas is, I found it really accessible and easy to work with. Let's see, I think I can actually increase the size of this for you. Yes, I can. Let's see if that helps. There. Stokas gives you grid
super duper blurry. I guess it's kind of coming into focus now. Sorry, Kev. Do you want to continue explaining?
This gives you this grid interface here.
Yes.
And this particular sequencer can, Andrew open source this. This is a free sequencer too, by the way. It's from the people who make the Surge synthesizer. Are you familiar with Surge?
I am, yes.
Okay, so it's the same people. This is called Stokas. And Stokas gives you actually a lot of really powerful controls for messing around with how the notes happen.
Yes.
And what I've done here is I've picked out a key. So I decided to go in C# Dorian. Unfortunately, I don't have controls yet for these to automate. You have to set these manually. But there are 4 layers. I've assigned them to 4 different MIDI channels. And I've set all of these keys to C# Dorian. Okay, so that's kind of, boring utility stuff. But to speed this up and to make it sort of a bit more easy to deal with, I've come up with these 2 knobs here, which I'm mapping to CC 14 and 15. And then in my contact stack, I'm using CC 14 and 15 and mapping to 4 different instances here on the no, sorry, not the balance, the root and the scale.
Gotcha.
So by doing that to all 4 of them in a row, because I ran into this problem where I would forget to set one of them,
Sure.
you'd have them in 2 different keys, which is bad magumbo. So by setting these up, as long as you don't silence it, can you see that the root key is changing from C to C sharp there?
I cannot. Can you point that out with your mouse?
So the the root key knob is this one here.
Okay.
And each of these instruments has a root key knob next to a scale knob. So that's where you're defining the root key and the scale that you want.
Gotcha.
So, but this little utility step here of just, you can see that little knob turning around there.
Yep.
What that's doing is changing not just this one instance. I'm getting a frog in my throat. Not this just this one instance, but all of them that I'm using, because I've mapped them all through CC 14 and 15 here. And this is one of those, it's a little more tricky than that, because I found out that the only way I could get this to work was to pick up those changes. And I was changing those with these knobs. You'd asked me about the knobs. And so when I turn the knobs, this is the data that's coming out. But that's changing, it's having the effect of changing all of the contact stack settings for root key and scale at the same time. So it's a time saver and it's an error preventer.
It's really interesting that you're taking that approach, because generally speaking, I would greatly encourage people to not do what you're doing. Literally, but in this case, because it prevents you from having to go through and do every single thing manually, this is actually the most efficient route.
Exactly. And that's another part of this whole thing of doing this workout every day, is that you find opportunities for saving yourself from making mistakes or missing things on the checkboxes, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And this is one of those things, because there were many times this came out of me getting frustrated by, oh no, I forgot to set the right key again. And the only limitation of this method is that they all have to be, none of them can be soloed.
Right.
So if you solo any of them and then you change it, it won't change the ones that are muted.
Gotcha.
So as long as you're not soloed on all of them, and you sort of get used to just tweaking this and just making sure that you've got them all lined up so that you don't run into it. Because there were lots of times that I did this, Brett, where I got the thing running and then I thought, something doesn't sound right and I'm completely musically illiterate. What have I done?
Sure.
And then I would go in there and find out, oh, well, it turns out if you have one of your contact instruments playing in the sequencer in a Locrian when the rest of them are Lydian, you're gonna have
a problem.
Results probably.
Yeah. So this is like the start, I guess, of your process is kind of choosing sounds. Would you say, like, you kind of get a
yes, and that's another thing that fell out of my sort of design that I came up with here, is that I can compartmentalize the composing and the performance aspect of the piece. By being able to let's see if I can think how to explain this within the context of my musical illiteracy, by having the music separated out. And I only came up with this idea like last night, actually. So you're sort of watching this growing on the vine here. But by separating out these 4 layers in Stokas, I'm picking up notes the way that I want to, so I can set it to a mono or a poly probability mode. I can set the maximum number of poly here. This isn't really going to be about this VST, right? That's not what the stream is about. Sure. But this allows me to, I call it note selection. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but this is what I started calling it. Note selection. So I want to hack music theory to make sure that I'm going to select notes that don't sound like something you want to throw into a dumpster fire.
Sure.
And once I have that coming out, and I've got my contact stack, I'm actually using Blue Cat Connector because it was the best and most reliable and flexible way I could find to get MIDI from global into local and so forth, especially when you start building out especially when you start building out more rigs. Now, the advantage of doing the way that I'm doing here, and you can see this already, Brett, but someone watching might not necessarily spot this. This allows me to compartmentalize the composition aspect of it and the sound design aspect of it. Okay, so I have, you know, the musicians. Okay, we think about it that way. I have the musicians off in the studio, and they're all playing their longs and their shorts and their articulations and whatever, and the conductor is waving his arms over the head. The notes are coming in, and now I get to take the MIDI notes that I'm getting and decide what each of those channels that I have set up is going to sound like.
Right.
And that gets into the realm of fun.
Yeah.
Okay? So you start having a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And especially in this particular genre of music, I mean, if you're classic rock cover group, something like that, I really recommend that you give that a break, you know, because they've been playing those songs for a half a century now, Brad. And
it's true.
Seriously. And so if you kind of, it goes around in your head, right? And, you know, they say, what we used to say in the broadcast business, we used to say the baby boomer generation ruined radio with classic rock, right? If you give that a break, give yourself a break and step out of it. And it's like going on a vacation or something. You can just kind of go down to the beach and you don't have to worry about meeting some kind of expectation and just see what you can come up with playing with sounds.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with playing. You know, I think that I think that just, you know, a personal problem I have is that I have trouble playing. You know, it's like it's a weird thing, but I'm always trying to justify everything, right? And I suppose a lot of us do that, right? But if you can really purify the approach you're taking to this, you get to boil it down and take advantages. You know, look at these pretty graphics and everything, right? Like this gives you the opportunity to kind of play with everything and come up with sounds that are, you know, different from the patches they give you. Like a lot of people use these synthesizers and samplers just as patch browsers, right? But if you know, another thing that I'm doing here, I didn't get into that yet, is playing with in Contact particularly. Now, there's lots of synthesizers I've used. I'm just using Contact here because I wanted to come up with something that was low CPU, and I didn't want it to be giving you a blurry picture, which I guess didn't work.
Well, it's coming back now. I think it maybe is the internet. I'm not really sure. Okay. You said something there, though, like about Contact being just really great on resources.
Oh, yeah. It's fantastic.
And you're not limited, right? Like if you're, you know, you're watching and you're doing, you know, whatever style of music you're doing, you can certainly sample any synth and bring it into Contact as a sample.
Oh, yeah.
You need to save CPU. So Contact does have a bunch of different options for you. Like, you know, what is it called? The Create or the Play series that's free?
Yes, you with Contact. Okay, now I'm not a Contact salesman, but I know about SoundWise, and I know that, you know, you guys have some kind of connection there. But Contact is, I mean, everybody knows, right? Contact is a fantastic instrument. But one of the things that I really found valuable to me is that with Contact, part of what you're getting with these Contact instruments, and even the free ones, the Contact Play instruments, the ones that you get with Total Control, which is, you know, free download for anybody, is the design of the sampled instruments. Okay, a lot of people, you know, they go to a lot of trouble to record these samples, and you know, the Contact instrument, a Contact Play instrument, you always have two samples, right? You've got an A sample and a B sample, and there's a balance control down here, and the balance control is not to be confused with the pan control, the left and right, which is up here, which I've also automated and played with. But the point here is the balance control is deciding how much of this sample and how much of this sample are involved in the resulting output. And using the same technique that I did for controlling the sequencer's root key and scale here, in this case, I use CC 14 and 15. You can use any CC you want. It doesn't really matter. I used this run of blanks here, 21 through 24. Oh, and I'll tell you another tip here. I always do this. I can never remember what all the CCs are. So what I do is I just pull up a MIDI filter, and I found that the list that you guys have in here is pretty comprehensive.
Oh, sure.
And I use this as a cheat card.
Okay.
If I'm deciding, what CC do I want to use? Well, I don't want to run the risk of running into some synthesizer that has implemented, modulation wheel fine or, expression fine, So I'll just use this to go through and figure out, where's a blank, a pass through that I can use. So that's one of my little operational tricks. But going back to this balance control, what I've done here is I've added this. In this case, I'm using CC 21 through 24, and I've mapped those through the balance control on each of these contact instruments. So what that lets me do is, in this case, and now this gets into using, actually use Device Meister for this. Device Meister Stepic, and Jens is here.
Thank you, Jens, for being here.
I really love this this sequencer as well. I mean, I have a bunch of sequencers, but this one has really worked out well for me. And one of the things I like about it is that it has this automation tab. And so the automation tab runs independently of the main sequencer. And I'm using that for something else I'll explain in a minute. But the automation tab is, in this case, I've got it set up. There's a lot of different ways you can set this up, but it's very powerful. But what I've got to do is, what I'm doing is selecting a value to go to. In this case, this says 25. So this is the 25 that I'm using. This one is called 25. So what I'm doing there is I'm sending, as it plays, it's sending a value that changes this balance control. And what that's doing is altering how much of this sample, the A sample and the B sample, are being involved at any moment. And so by doing that, just infrequently, every once in a while, it's going to have the effect of giving me almost like different instruments playing.
Yes.
But in a really curated way, so that I'm not just like, it's not like Krell music where I'm just playing a random frequency. What I'm doing is actually taking advantage of the taste and the engineering prowess and the production prowess of the guys who designed these sounds, of the sound designers. So it's like I'm a kid who's being put into a really huge playpen. I can go and play with anything I want to in there, and I'm not going to get hurt. Put it that way. I've got 2 grandchildren now, so you have to start thinking that way.
Well, the other thing too, Kev, that you're kind of jumping around here is that like those knobs at the bottom are not an accident.
Absolutely not an accident, and that plays right into what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
By focusing, there's so many controls. I mean, if you look at the host automation parameters, okay, here, look at this list. This is coming from Contact, okay.
Yep.
Every single one of these things that I'm scrolling down through here, you can automate using host automation, which is a different method from MIDI CC.
Yep.
But what those talk to is, it talks to every one of the controls on every one of these panels in here. So you have absolute control. But the genius of this Contact Play series, the instrument, is that this bottom row here, which is the same on all of them. Okay, well, these are instruments that come from Contact, and there's a lot of other developers who adopt the same design philosophy for making these.
Arturia has a very similar. I mean, they all do, really, but yeah, go on, Kevin.
But what I'm getting at, the payload here is that these knobs along the bottom here are really, really powerful sound design tools. That one of the things I love about these, the sound design in Contact, is that these knobs are very meaningful, and they're not just randomly selected. They're not just going, oh, we got to fill up 6 different knobs. These actually are a big deal. And if you work this bottom row here and you start playing with this bottom row, you're going to be able to get customized variations of the sounds that are coming out.
Yes.
That will still when you start using other instruments, it will combine with other instruments. And one of the things that I was really pleased with in this experiment that I've done is that I came up with, in sitting and actually listening to it, which you have to do. You got to eat your own dog food, right? So in sitting and listening to it, I would notice that it was actually, without being self-serving, it was actually compelling. Like I could actually sit and listen to it and put it on, and I'd be scrolling on my phone or something like that, or reading a book or something, and then I would notice and go, that's like, there's strings happening in there, and there's horns happening in there, and there's some kind of synthesizer happening in there. And I kind of ran out of time here, and I didn't add another really beefy like bass synth, which I usually do too.
Yeah.
But your bass synth is happening in there, and so and here's another aspect of the whole overall design thing is that using Contact, I will end up with these sampled aspects of it, but I will also add an analog emulation of a synthesizer. Like I've been using a lot of the Cherry Audio ones lately.
Yes,
they have another. Cherry Audio has a new synth dropping today too. It's an original synth. It's not an emulation.
Very interesting.
I remember the name of it.
Another senior moment.
But it's apparently it's their own design. So it's
Is
like
it
a total
Elka X?
No, Elka was the one that came out a couple of weeks ago, and that's an emulation of this extremely rare Italian synthesizer. Really interesting story behind it too, for somebody who worked in electronics manufacturing. But the point is, I will use one of these synthesizers for bass. And the other thing about I love the global rack space, because this is where I do all of my processing and mastering, and I haven't gone into that whole thing. But another aspect of doing this live, because I didn't pre-render these in a digital audio workstation and upload them. I did them all live, which means that you have to take people's eardrums into account.
Sure.
You have to use limiters, and you have to use compression and stuff like that. And I can come up with a way of doing the processing. And this is another aspect that changed every time I open a new blank gig file, was that I would experiment with different processing chains for producing my final, minus 14.4 Loudness Targeting and all that kind of stuff. If you go down that far into those rat holes.
So you're doing all of this in real time, some Contact, some synthesizers, and then before it hits YouTube, you're making sure everything is at the same level.
Yes. Well, I'm doing loudness targeting. So what I'll do is I'll go and I'll use something like this one, just because I know everybody knows this one. I think I'll use Uline.
Okay.
But I don't recommend leaving the free version running, because it's got some problems. It'll crash.
The free version, you said?
Yeah, I don't know this. I've tried using the free version, but I have had it be the cause of a crash. So I wouldn't. I would use it for checking on things, but I wouldn't leave it on a production one that I was going to do live.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's very easy to understand and easy to read. That's why I recommended it.
Absolutely. So just for like clarity, we talk a lot about on the stream, using avoiding standardized CC messages, because
avoiding standardized,
avoiding being like, I'm going to send CC11 to control expression, or send CC whatever, because in the context of using a keyboard on a stage, or using, a MIDI instrument of any type, there's a possibility that you may accidentally send a message. But in your context, that's not going to happen, because because your all of your CC messages, if you're like listening and you're trying to piece this together, all of the CC messages you're sending on purpose from one of your sequencers.
Absolutely.
So you're not just sequencing notes, you're also sequencing controls. So because of the just format of it, there's no chance of any accident happening. And so doing it in this,
unless the accident started in here.
fair. Yeah. So there's some of the precautions that we take as instrumentalists are a little bit different than you would take as a sequencer.
Yeah, I see. I took all the safeties off, right? So I don't have to worry about a paying audience. And that's why, I would actually recommend, I've been thinking about this. I would actually recommend it. Like, if you're sort of in the same kind of space as me, and there probably are a lot of people who have some interest in synthesizers, they've got some collection of VSTs, they kind of sort of played with it, maybe make some cover songs and stuff like that. So that's what we all sort of do when we start out. I would say pull the trigger and buy the license. Here I put my salesman hat on. Pull the trigger and buy the license for Gig Performer, because first of all, it's not the biggest cliff you've jumped off in the last month. You can afford it. It's a little more expensive, but it's not that expensive. I mean, if you added up everything else that you spent on your setup, especially if you've got advanced stage gear acquisition syndrome, like a lot of people do, right? I managed to evade. I've soft gear acquisition syndrome. That's my problem. But the point is, if you give yourself this playground, okay. So I think of Gig Performer as a playground where I can just fool around with anything I want to. You have to apply some kind of a discipline, right? Like I took my 2-year-old granddaughter out to the slide for the first time, and she had to learn how to walk up to the top and go over to the edge and then get her courage up and go down the slide, right? But now that's her favorite video of all time to watch on my phone when she comes to visit me, right? Because that's the moment where you make the thing happen, right?
Yes.
And I would say, get Gig Performer, just get it.
Yeah.
Even if you get it and it, you don't do much with it, and maybe you just set it up to control some things with the VSTs with your controller, that's fine. That's fine. At some point, you're going to be able to go into the deep end of the pool. And when you do that, don't be afraid of it. Don't approach it as, oh no, like I think there's a fear factor when you're, especially if you're a live musician. Okay, now you are out there every Sunday morning, right, Brett?
It's true.
You're out there. I've been there. I've been conducting the choir on Sunday morning, and you can't mess around with that, right? You have to color inside the lines. But when you're using Gig Performer as kind of a sonic playground, it's actually not that expensive, and it runs like a tank. The thing is a tank. You cannot break this program. Having said that, sure, I've had crashes, but that wasn't Gig Performer's fault.
Yeah,
it's never Gig Performer's fault. That's because of something that went wrong in a VST. You got some VSTs that won't allow you to run more than one instance, or they get twitchy, or whatever happens, right? It's a program. Once you give the VST control, it's a program. It can do whatever it wants to. And if it crashes, that could take Gig Performer down, but that's not Gig Performer's fault, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Well, so it is like the reliability thing is just super paramount. But then there's also the testing thing, which is also paramount, right? Like the repetitions of making sure that something is solid and stable, and learning.
And that process, like especially the way that the kind of obsessive compulsive lunatic way that I approach this starting in April, the process has given me a lot of learning opportunities. And, I've learned a tremendous amount about VSTs, particular synthesizers, the whole aspect of mastering the music and getting it to the loudness target you want without going too loud and all this kind of stuff. And I'm one of those people who actually go and turn on the stats for Geeks thing in YouTube to see if they turned me down as much as they turned down Bruno Mars, stuff like that. So the thing is that Gig Performer it puts all of the tools on the table. It's like walking into if you like woodworking, it's like walking into a woodworking shop that is completely equipped, lined wall to wall with every conceivable tool and attachment, and everything. If you don't see it, there's a way to make it happen anyway. You just didn't notice it yet.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to, first of all, if anybody has questions for Kevin, please post them. Jeff Wheeler says, jamming over my own soundscape creations is my new phase after years of songs and copies with Gig Performers. Awesome flexibility. My sound palette is limitless, and I'm loving it.
Yeah. So Jeff is a believer too.
Yeah. So I would love to hear this. Actually, one thing I wanted to point out. So first of all, if you have any questions for Kevin, let's put them in the comments. Second of all, Kevin, this is a pro tip for you, but also actually for everybody, really.
Hey, so I told you I'm an amateur. I can get away with murder.
Well, okay, this is another thing too, right? Like, we are here because we care about the process of creation, but the audience that consumes your music doesn't care. They're two different audiences. And so like, to anybody who's
That's why I haven't done how-tos yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Seriously. I mean, we're ready for it, by the way. But the thing I'm getting at here is that like, as performers who are making art, what people care about who are receiving our art is what is created, not how it is made. So if you have a tool that works for you and you're getting the output that you want, then who cares how you're using it, right? Like, because you're getting this output, and that's like the primary thing people interact with, which I just think is important. Second of all, Nemanja just wrote a blog about using MIDI files to control rack space switching. Now, you're not doing that, but what you are
Oh,
doing
yes,
is
I
using...
am, Brett. Oh, yes, I am.
Oh, there you go. Are you using Blue Cat to get your CCs back in?
I am. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
actually I'm using Blue Cat to get all of my MIDI is coming in through Blue Cat. So I wanted
here's...
to make this. I wanted to be able to create for you and David today, Brett, this shockingly simple layout. Shockingly simple layout.
Yeah, but beautifully laid out.
That actually doesn't even need these. Gone. Don't need those. The MIDI file player. This is my own special invention, which I'm sure other people have invented. I just made it. This is an example of all the different crazy ways that I've tried to get MIDI into Gig Performer into my VSTs. This is a custom MIDI file that I created yesterday afternoon in Reaper. Just the only thing this MIDI file does, because of Reaper, you have to put one MIDI event in there. So it's like a C-2 with the velocity turned down to 0 at the very end of it, so that I can export the MIDI file. But what this does is it varies the tempo over a period of time, very slightly. And, that's sort of like anathema to a lot of people, but you'll notice it says 118 here. I'm using the default 120. That's another thing. You don't have to use 20 beats per minute to make this type of music. That's something that I learned along the way, and you shouldn't, because it gives you a lot more options if you leave it at 120 because of the resolution that you get.
Yeah.
But if I start playing this, notice what's happening to the it's happening very slowly, but 118.2 beats per minute. It's going to change 118.3. Okay. So what's happening is I've got a couple of like linear changes happening in here that will just vary the tempo of the piece a little bit over time. Why would you do that, Kevin? That's like anathema to a lot of people, especially myself. Like I used to DJ dances when I was a teenager and I was in radio and stuff like that. Everything had to be 120 beats per minute. One of the things we found out back in radio is that men have a tendency to prefer constant beats per minute. Women like to hear a variation, even a slight variation.
Interesting.
So I'm trying to address that a little bit, but there's a technical reason that I do this too. In this case, and this works with a lot of VSTs, I'm using this tape echo. Now, anybody who's been in a recording studio sometime in the last half a century has probably seen one of these in the corner. This is a very famous Roland tape echo, which is emulated masterfully by Cherry Audio. And I'm not a salesman for Cherry Audio, but by changing the tempo, this is going to have effects on this tape echo. And I found that it will actually produce a whole new class of different kinds of artifacts and sounds, because the tape echo is hanging on to the pitch of what's going into it. And by changing the tempo, the samples and the rate or something with the something and the something, you end up with these whole different kinds of sounds that will emerge from your existing reverb and delay plugins automatically. So that's just a nice little hack. Now, this particular MIDI file, and I'm guessing that what has been identified in there is that you can put 127 curves in your MIDI file that are changing all the time. And I've also done, Brett, I've even created these custom reactor packages that I made to produce, LFO change frequencies expressed as CCs to vary different controls on. Like, I've done some really wacky stuff.
Interesting.
Just gone to places that I didn't even think I was going to be going with this stuff, but that goes along with the whole playing around thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So much as possible sending messages in like this. If you need a local way to get MIDI CC back into Gig Performer, there is a mini script in the blog that was just done that will send it back into the local GP port.
Okay.
and then you can use a MIDI in block from the local GP port to send it. Anyway, what you're
Okay,
doing.
because thanks for the tip. I will go and look that up. And by the way, I'm going to do the commercial for you, Brett.
Tell me.
The support that you get in the discourse, and this is not set up. We didn't set this up in advance. We didn't even mention this before. But the support that you get in the Gig Performer discourse is totally worth the price of admission if you're buying a copy of Gig Performer. There are people in there have been using this program for as long as it's been around, like, what is it, 7, 8, 9 years or something, since this, I think it's 2015,
2012?
2012, something like that, since Gig Performer has been in existence. And if you go in there and put the simplest total beginner question, dummy mode enabled, you're going to get these really friendly, kindly people pointing you to exactly the information that you need, and they will bend over. I have seen people in there writing scripts for other people to do custom things, like really complicated scripts that do really complicated things.
Yes.
So this is really remarkable. The discourse support for Gig Performer is off the scale. Like, you pay your $167. What is it? The list price for the program. You getting all that support too. And I have not seen support like that. I mean, I ain't naming names, but I sent around a lot of emails this week to a lot of VST developers who didn't even respond to my email. Like, not, even as a customer, as a tech support message, haven't even responded to me yet.
Yes.
But if you drop a note into the discourse for Gig Performer, you are the first response that I got when I put this thread in there about my little journey here was from David.
Yeah. Yep.
And his response was one word: "Wow!" 2 exclamation points, which kind of blew me away. Right.
Yeah.
But the point is, scripting. I mentioned that I was trying to simplify things as much as possible. Well, scripting. I have a background in software development, so I wanted to keep
the scripting
my blinders on. So scripting is going to be like the next level for me. I'm going to start getting into scripting now. So thanks for that tip. I'll go and look that one up, Brett.
For sure. I mean, it's even more for people who don't have a solution. But this script, by the way, is one line, and it's copy paste. So if you don't want to learn scripting, you can stay away from it. I know I can tempt you down the rabbit hole of scripting. Okay, so
scripting. If you're not into programming, if that's not something you've done in the background, you have to remember that. I mean, we have some hardcore software developers watching this today too. But if you're a musician and you're kind of scared, of programming, scripting is easy mode programming.
It's also not needed in Gig Performer.
It's totally not needed.
Yeah.
All the stuff that I've done here has been without any scripting of any kind. Zero scripting.
Yep. Glenn wants to know if you plan to share any of your rack files.
My rigor rack files. I could be convinced. I set up an email address. I'll just write the email address and hold it up to the camera, Brett. Just give me a second here.
Okay.
Because I have this advanced setup here that allows me to put graphics on the screen.
So oh goodness. If you end up sharing these, there's a space in the forum that would work just fine. And when you hold this email up, I'll try and type it. Oh, I can't read that.
The gray.
Yeah.
The gray is cool.
Yep. Can't read that at all.
The gray is cool.
With an E or an A?
Just like it sounds, with an A. The gray is cool.
At
gmail.com. The gray is cool.
All right. It's in the chat.
Cool. The gray is cool.
Great.
At gmail.com.
So that is in the chat right now. If you want to get in touch with Kevin. Kevin, can you play us your sequenced song?
Sure. How many hours you want? Because it's generative.
It is generative. Well, can you give us a 3-minute version?
Sure.
All right.
And that's the other thing. Another aspect about this was that with my 5 years of this, real quick, 5 years of streaming on Twitch, interaction with the chat, as you know, Brett, is very important. Yeah. And I tried doing that playing a game, very distracting to try to
Yeah.
talk to 40 people are watching you play a game at the same time that you're kind of, I went out and bought one of these things. I never had one of these in my life before.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really actually playing the game. There was someone else who knew how to play it, who was operating me like a meat puppet from remote control. But the musical result here. So this particular piece, I called it All Hallows.
All Hallows. I love it.
Because musically, when I was deciding, like I didn't go into the whole thing there, but the tonality of it, the note selection, I call it, I wanted to reference All Hallows Eve, which everybody's getting all excited about at this time of the year. And Halloween, of course, is the exact opposite of what All Hallows Eve actually means. All Hallows Eve is the Feast of All Saints. So it's like the opposite. So I called it All Hallows. And it's not scary, but it's got kind of moodiness. I did it in Dorian. I'm learning about the emotional reactions of these.
Yes. And
modes.
There's what's cool about this, Kevin, is that it's nothing is random, even though there's some randomness, but it's like intentionally built.
I just have to make sure that I didn't knock myself. No, I didn't. Okay. I didn't knock myself into the wrong key, but that's another thing. And I didn't go into this. Once you have all this set up and it turns into sound design, guess what, Brett? You can start replicating the rack spaces.
Yeah.
And because I'm doing my note selection and CC control in the global rack space, if I switch from one rack space to another, even if I'm using a different tempo, that smooth fading from one rack space to another. I didn't multiply this out here today, but that all works too. And you can get completely different sound design for all the rack spaces that you have. So,
yes.
If you don't have Gig Performer, do yourself a favor, get it today. What can I say?
I love it. I'm going to put you full screen on, and maybe you can even narrate it if you want.
Sure.
Just explain what's happening so we can kind of get the vibe, and we'll have a listen.
So so when I came up with these graphics, see, maybe I'll play with the graphics while I'm at it here too. All this stuff is happening in real time too, by the way, Brett.
Yes.
Now there's one of the downsides, that loud note that just happened there. This one isn't very well developed. I just made it yesterday.
Sure.
And you get surprises. Like I did not realize that I was going to get this kind of plodding sort of like little kids walking around outside on the 31st of October in their little costumes,
the Dorian mode will do that for
candy and stuff like that, right? It's a little bit of teddy bear's picnic or something happening. But the other thing is that if you listen as time goes on, sometimes I will also get these. Take that away. I will get these silent spots that happen, and that's part of it as well. I have to deal with how I'm triggering notes, and you can see there. I didn't do anything. All I did was hit the play button a minute ago,
Yep.
And now because of the changes that I have going to the balance controls in the contact stack that I'm using, and I'm only using one contact stack, and it's only got 4 contact instruments in it. That balance control really multiplies the options and the possibilities of the sounds that you get. And that's only the balance control. There's all of those other controls on the bottom of the contact instruments for each instrument. These controls along here work that bottom row. And another pro tip, this little dice thing up here, if you've never looked at that before, the little dice thing, on the bottom right of all the instruments, if you hold down the shift key and click it, if you click it by itself, it completely randomizes the whole sound. But if you hold down just the shift key and click it, it randomizes just these controls here.
Yep.
So you end up with a sound that is kind of following the rules, like it's sort of curated. And another thing that's just, actually missing from this particular piece is that I never got to the stage of adding a bass synth. And in fact, when I do that, I will actually add more stuff to the processing here. Sometimes I'll add a bass emphasis, or something like a Waves Max bass or something like that, so that I can really have a lot more control over the bass end of it. But I wanted to get some excitement factor in here, so that's why I included because all the little Halloweeners on the streets there, they can all start dancing.
That's right. I love it.
And also, if you have bass and drums playing and stuff like that, if the stochastic stuff results in silence for a moment, instead of it just being the movement in between two, the silence in between two movements of an orchestra, you can have this continuity happening between them.
Yeah.
And by having all of this, the robots playing the music like this, my vision was that would give me the ability to interact with chat. But I don't have any viewers yet. So
are you going to live stream this particular one on your channel?
I was thinking, I could actually live stream it. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to do that now or later?
Put it on. Yeah.
Are you planning to do that like right after the stream, or are you going to tweak it first?
I could do it later today. I'd have to switch a couple of cables around to be able to do the StreamYard thing, but I could do it later today. Yeah. Tell you what, if you send an email. If you send an email to my
The Gray is Cool,
thegrayiscool@gmail.com, I'll push a message out to tell you when I put it live.
Is what's on the screen right now?
That is correct. You are correct, sir. Bonus points if you get that reference to 20th century television comedy.
Kevin, thanks so much for being with us.
Brett, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for your kindness, and especially the whole hour you spent with last week, just getting to know each other. We did another call, before, just so we could horse around and talk.
Yeah.
And also thank you, David, for dropping in before the show. I know he has a show that he has to drive for tonight.
Yep.
Go see him if you're in New York City. I'm plugging you, David.
That's right. Omri, special thank you to you as well.
Omri, thank you so much for dropping in. Check out his YouTube channel. If you are interested in modular synthesis, modulate the modulations. That's Omri's thing.
I love it.
Extremely generous, detailed, and comprehensive YouTuber. Extensively talking about sound design. I've applied so much that I learned from watching his streams to what I'm doing here.
Amazing. And then you also had one more special visitor, right? Who is that popped in?
Jens from Device Meister. Device Meister is the particular, and I didn't go into this there's even more detail to this, of course, because I have this Device Meister. I'm actually using it to control Stokas as well, which is, so I'm having it change things within Stokas. I didn't get time to go into all of that. So if you send me the email thing, I don't know, maybe I'll start mailing people if there's enough interest.
Yeah, there's an email here. So if you want to be in touch with Kevin, thegrayiscool@gmail.com, shoot him an email. And then Kevin, you're also in the community forums. The Gig Performer community
I do
forum.
pop in there. Yes, I do pop in there. And it's such a friendly place. It's such an incredibly friendly online internet place. I highly recommend it. And the price of admission is a seat of Gig Performers. So do yourself that favor.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place. It actually kind of surprises me. I've been in the forums for a while, but every time I go on there, I'm like, this is unusually good.
You can't believe how nice the people are.
Yeah.
And that's not me selling soap here. I'm serious.
Yeah, it's true. I actually don't even know if you need a license to be on the forum. So if you don't believe us, go check out the forum.
Oh, I think, you're right. You're right. You can just try out and see what it's all about.
Thank you so much for being here. We'll be back next week, same time, 11:30 Eastern Standard. Kevin, this was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who's watching. Special thank you to Omri Cohen and Device Meister for being here. We'll see y'all next time. Oh, I love the play out music. It's so good.
Thank you.